Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. This is Kenneth Marks from The Ancestor Hunt. That is www.theancestorhunt.com. Please feel free to visit my website. There's tons of information about researching historic newspapers along with many other different types of articles. Today we're going to be sharing with you 75, yes that's 75 different techniques to research historic newspapers. We're going to present them from A to Z, so that should be interesting and fun. And the goal here is to highlight some places for you to visit, some techniques, some different ways to search and browse, and a lot of different things that will definitely help you to find more articles about your ancestors and those folks that inhabit your family tree. So for genealogy and family history purposes, researching historic newspapers, which is my favorite thing to do in the whole genealogy space, is the thing that we are going to be discussing today. And hopefully these will be helpful to you. I am sure that they will be, and I will almost guarantee that if you apply some of these techniques, you're going to find more articles about your ancestors. So let's get started. Why should we search old newspapers in the first place? Well, there's basically, I see three different kinds of reasons for that. Newspaper articles can provide you with new names for your tree. Also, you can get dates and relationships. And that's not just from obituaries necessarily, but from lots of different types of articles. And some of them we'll be sharing with you. But best of all is you get to obtain the stories of your ancestors' lives, because those are indeed documented in a whole different set of newspaper articles. Lots of us have living relatives, but many of them do not have in their brain, from discussing with older relatives who are still with them or deceased, the stories of their ancestors' lives. Some of these stories are 100, 150, maybe even 200 years old, and many living relatives can neither remember or may not even have access to some of these stories from their parents and grandparents. So that's why we search old newspapers. So let's get started. For the letter A, there we've got 5 different techniques for you to think about. The first one is always write down the information about the page. When you obtain an article, you want to make sure and write a source citation. You want to document the title of the newspaper, the date it was published, the location, that's city and state or province or country, whatever, the page number, and where you found it. For a couple of reasons. One, because later on somebody else is probably going to look at the clipping or the image of the newspaper article, and they're going to want to know where you got it. Second of all, you're going to want to know yourself, because I can tell you from personal experience, I have had clippings in my digital folder on my computer and I can't remember where I found it. So in trying to tie that information within the article to some research that I'm doing and trying to establish some evidence, if I don't know where I got it, it sometimes can defeat the purpose. Second of all, always save your online finds, your results, your clippings as a PDF. I always clip the article and save it as a clipping, but I also save the entire page that it was on as a PDF. I do this for a couple of reasons. One is it does have information about the newspaper title, date, location, and page number at the top of the page, but also if I didn't do a very good job of clipping the article in the first place, I always have the PDF as a backup later. So you want to be able to have a good file name for your digital file, and even if it's a copy from a library where you got an image and maybe you scan it later, you're going to want to save it as a PDF as well. Another A is advertisements. Advertisements are a really cool place to find information about your ancestors. Don't ignore them, because you'll be surprised I found some things about my great-grandfather and about a great-great-great-uncle that was really fun to learn about their life. It was not earth-shattering necessarily, but it helped me to fill out the story of those particular ancestors' lives. The most important thing on this page, in my view, is when you're searching online, you've basically got two options. You've got a basic search and you've got an advanced search. The basic search is usually limited to just a search box where you put in a search term. Many people just put in a surname. Sometimes you can have a date range and sometimes you can narrow the location, but that's usually about it in a basic search. Advanced search provides all kinds of different options. It provides you to narrow in on a specific geographic area, maybe a specific newspaper, a date range, a proximity search. Proximity search is the ability to search for word A within, say, 5 words of word B. It also provides Boolean types of searching, such as word A and word B appearing on the page, or word A or word B appearing on a page, or a specific phrase, which is similar to if you use Google, putting the words within quotes. And lastly, addresses should be included in your search criteria sometimes. Many folks just use surnames or full names, but try an address. If you know an address, say from a city directory or from another source for a specific person, maybe searching on the address may find an article where the surname was not picked up properly by the OCR process, and therefore you could find some articles that you wouldn't otherwise find. So that's the letter A. Let's go to the letter B. In an obituary, they typically put in the burial information. For example, this funeral is to be held on such and such a date, interment to be at XYZ cemetery. Well, a couple things may be problematic with that. One is from the time they publish the obituary, they may change their mind on where they want to inter the deceased. Or secondly, later on, 20 or 30 or even 50 years later, maybe the cemetery goes out of business and they move all the bodies or the remains to a different cemetery. So it is not always forever. Secondly, be creative with your search criteria. Don't confine yourself to just names. Try different types of things, and we'll get into more ideas about that a little later. Browsing is also a capability offered on many websites, and that is always recommended because, again, the OCR process does not always result in the exact words that were in the original material ending up in the index, because possibly the image was dirty. The newspaper was dirty. It had creases in it. It had ink spots for whatever reason, or it was scanned. It was scanned multiple times from a microfilm copy number 3. So you had a scan from an image, then you had a microfilm, then you made a copy of the microfilm, then there was another copy of the microfilm, and then it was digitized. So every time that happens, it degrades the original material. So you're going to want to browse, and that means going to a specific issue and maybe going to the next issue and the next issue if you have some ideas about the dates for when a certain event occurred in someone's life. When you're searching for obituaries, try the word beloved in your search criteria. If you look at obituaries, oftentimes you will see common words such as the beloved son of, or the beloved husband of. Another idea is loving, the loving father of, or dear sister of. Those are good words to put in your search criteria for obituaries. Beloved, loving, dear, those are good. For birth announcements, same concept. Add born to or born to the wife of with a name, and that will lead you to birth announcements. So if you're looking for a birth announcement, add those particular words to the search criteria. Did your ancestor live near a border? Check the neighboring areas. I have a lot of relatives that lived in Iowa, very near the Nebraska border. So rather than just searching in Iowa, in this particular case, I searched in the Omaha, Nebraska newspapers. So incorporate those into your search criteria. Let's try C. Crowdsourcing. What is crowdsourcing? Well, there are a few software packages now that handle digitized images where you have the ability as the user, and usually you have to register in order to do this, you have the ability to fix the erroneous OCR output and improve the index. If you've ever seen the text from the OCR process, sometimes it is very, very good, and sometimes it is very, very bad. So if you know what should be there, some of these websites allow you to actually correct the erroneous OCR output with what it should be, sort of a pay it forward for the next folks that are going to search. Classified ads are a great place to find out about your ancestors' business, their occupation, and other interesting info. When my grandmother moved from Brooklyn, New York to Oakland, California in 1910, she was only 16 years old, but she was a very experienced and rapid typist and stenographer. She put an ad in the paper, sort of a help wanted or help needed kind of a ad, and I was able to find some information about her by looking at the classified ads. Third item, make sure you clip your article carefully and make sure it is zoomable enough for later use. In the early days of my newspaper research online, I did not do this, and so I ended up with some very small clippings that I could not zoom without degrading the display, and therefore I couldn't read it. So make sure you clip it carefully and make sure it is zoomable for later use. Last on the letter C is clues. Clues are what you get in obituaries, not facts. Just like death certificates are only as good as the person that provided the information to the mortuary, the same is true with newspaper articles, and specifically obituaries. Obituaries are typically written by someone in the newspaper office, but the information comes from one of the relatives of the deceased. And since they are grieving, they sometimes cannot think straight, and so you may not get all the exact information that you would constitute as a fact. So remember, it's evidence and it's clues, but it's not necessarily a fact. D. Let's take a look at the letter D. Divorces filed, interlocutory decrees, and divorces granted are typically found in the vital statistics section of the newspaper. But the first two are not divorces. Just because you filed a divorce doesn't mean you're divorced. And just because you got an interlocutory decree does not mean you're divorced. The only time you're divorced is when it's been granted. So make sure you make that distinction when looking for information about a divorce of one of your ancestors or relatives, and it should be in the divorces granted area, not the other two. I've mentioned this a little bit before. Don't just search for names, and especially surnames. Add in different things into your search criteria. Addresses, occupations, other keywords. Try different kinds of search criteria because you're going to end up with more possible results and home in on some information that you would not necessarily find if you just search for surnames. There'll be a lot more in this webinar about search criteria, and this is just one of them. The letter E. The first three, we talk about exchanging the letters of a word pair, a letter pair. And what do I mean by that? Sometimes in the OCR process, a C in the newsprint ends up as an E in the index and vice versa. As you can see, the C and the E are pretty much the same, except there's a little line in the E. The same is true for B and H. As you can see, if you close off the H at the bottom, it's going to end up a B. And also the same is true for R and N. And there are other letter pairs that are similar to this. So try deliberately misspelling a search term, and you will find more results. I'll give you an example. I have a lot of folks in my tree named Braunhart, B-R-A-U-N-H-A-R-T. So what I have done in searching for them is I'll change the name from Braunhart to Braunbart, B-R-A-U-N-B-A-R-T. First time I did this, I got 12% more results, more articles about that particular person. Please do this. This is an important way to find more articles. The fourth thing is Elefind. I don't know if you're familiar with Elefind. Elefind is a website created by a company in New Zealand that allows you to search multiple collections and multiple databases at one time with one search. I won't go into it a lot in detail. You can look for it yourself. It's elephind.com. Take a look at that. It's a fun website, and it might save you some time and might get you some more results. Lastly, in the letter E, let's search for an event instead of or combining with a name. If your ancestor was involved in some event, try putting the word from the event in the search terms. I'll give you an example. The 1906 earthquake. A lot of my ancestors were stricken by that. In fact, one actually was injured as a result of the earthquake, and I couldn't find him in April of 1906, but when I put in the term San Francisco fire or San Francisco earthquake along with his name, I was able to find some articles that were actually published in different parts of the country that listed his name as one of the folks that was injured. So make sure that you put in events as part of your search criteria from time to time. Letter F. I'd like to talk about Fulton Postcards. Fulton Postcards is the biggest online free site in the U.S. It has over 28 million pages. It is huge. Most of the articles are from New York, but the author of the website and the person who has been doing all the work for this for the last several years is growing it to other states now. So don't discard Fulton Postcards just because you think it's all about New York. Even though there's a lot of us in the United States that have many relatives from New York or ancestors, it is growing to other states, so it's certainly worth checking into. Find more articles by being creative and persistent. Creative, we talked a little bit about creative search criteria, but you got to be persistent. You got to keep after it. Don't give up. Follow your instincts. If you think an article should be there, it likely is, but it may not show up because during the OCR process, as we mentioned before, it may not have picked up the words exactly. So whether it be browsing or searching with a lot of different misspelled words or whatever, follow your instincts. If you think it should be there, it probably is, especially for the date that you might be interested in, and don't give up because persistence will pay off. Let's try the letter G. You're going to find some articles that are not going to be very nice to read. You're going to maybe even feel a little bit of guilt if you've got an ancestor who was a pimp or a murderer or married more times than you thought that particular person was. And there's lots of different examples. There's maybe some embarrassing information in an article that you think, boy, I really don't want to tell anybody about that. Well, whether you tell them or not, the fact is you got to have a thick skin because you are going to find in your family tree folks who are pimps, murderers, rum runners, you name it. So keep a thick skin. The next item is pretty darn important. Get out of the house from time to time. Go to a library, go to an archive, go to a university, because the great majority of newspapers that are available for searching are not available online. They are offline. So find out the libraries and archives and the universities and colleges around you. Find out what they have in their collections. You might be surprised. And get out of the house and go there. Look through some microfilm. You may even have to browse through some actual newsprint. But that's kind of fun to do that from once in a while. So get out of the house because you're going to find more articles. Given names were not always printed in full in the newspaper. For example, Robert was sometimes spelled R-O-B-T. John was J-N-O. William was W-M. George, G-E-O. And there are many more examples like that. But try those in searches. I did a search just for fun the other day for, I won't tell you the surname, it doesn't matter. And the first search was George with the surname, and the second search was G-E-O with the surname. I found 50% more results with just putting in G-E-O. So this was a common thing to do in historic newspapers. You've got to try abbreviated given names because it will find you more articles. What is H for? Well, I oftentimes talk a lot about American newspapers, but America is not the whole world, and there are lots of newspapers in many different countries. There's an index called Heaton's Index to Digitize British and Irish Newspapers Online. Google that. Look it up. If you've got British and Irish ancestors, it has a large set of links for places where you can do some online searching for British and Irish newspapers. You need to take advantage of this because you will find more articles about your ancestors. Words were often hyphenated years ago. The type was fixed size, and there wasn't a lot of digitization or digital kinds of typesetting like we have today. As a result, there were a lot of hyphens. So, search for syllables. Let me give you an example. The last name Jorgensen, Jorgen, S-E-N, or Jorgensen with S-O-N as the last syllable. Search for Jorgen. If you have a proximity search, search for Jorgen space S-E-N or Jorgen space S-O-N. Take advantage of the fact that you can find more stuff by searching for just one syllable or a combination of a syllable and another syllable with a proximity search. Give you an example again. Remember the term Braunhart, B-R-A-U-N-H-A-R-T. I've done searches that way, where I've searched just for Braun or Braun and space H-A-R-T. I've done an and search and a proximity search. Guess what? I found more articles. So you take advantage of the fact that hyphenated words will not necessarily produce the exact surname without the hyphen. But if you search for syllables separately, you might just find some more ancestors. In fact, more articles. And in fact, I guarantee that you will. How about the letter I? Let's take a look at the letter I. It's easy to get frustrated. Guaranteed. You will get frustrated because I've heard from many folks that I've talked to, I can't find anything. I've searched and I've searched and I've searched and I can't find anything. Well, guess what? Only 10, maybe to 15% on the outside of old newspapers are online. That means most of them are in libraries, archives, or somebody's attic, basement, or lost forever. We don't know. So it is easy to get frustrated. Keep it cool. The number's getting bigger over time if you're confined to online searching. But if you get out of the house and search for offline newspapers through microfilm or original newsprint in libraries, archives, etc., you will get less frustrated. Go to a library. Contact one. If the library that holds the newspaper for the date range that you're interested in is, on the other side of the country, contact them. Find out what they will do for you in terms of searching and possibly sending you a copy of the image. Depending on their budget, their time frame, they may charge you. Whatever, contact them. You never know unless you ask. When you find an article, I always check the previous issue dates and those following the publication of the article that I found, because there may be more about an event of interest. If it's just a discussion of a party that somebody went to, maybe you could go a couple, 3 days or a week before, and there might be more information about the party that was set up. Obviously, for weddings, there's engagement parties, sometimes days, weeks before. So take a look at it a couple dates before, a couple days after. If it's a court case, it's going to go on for days probably, so you're going to want to check issues before and after the first find. When you download an image from an online site, whether it is a clipping or a full page, don't name it johndoeclipping.jpg or marysmitharticle.pdf, because that is not going to be helpful for you later. Put some information about the source, the name of the news, first of all, the name of the person of interest, maybe a little bit about the clipping that is descriptive, the name of the publication, the date, location, and page number. That's going to be helpful for you later, I guarantee you. A site that is worth looking at is the International Coalition on Newspapers, ICON. Their newspaper digitization project website has links to historic newspapers from all over the world. So you're going to want to take a look at that site, because just like the Heaton's site for British and Irish newspapers, and others that we'll mention later, they have links for online websites available all over the world. So you're going to take a look at that, because that's going to provide you fodder for your searching. How about the letter J? I'll give you an example of the jump reference here, and that is I have many relatives who lived in Oakland, California. Actually, I was born there, but they were not found when I did a surname search. So what did I do? I looked at their death date, and what the Oakland Tribune did for a certain period of time is they always had the vital statistics and obituaries on the same page. Let's say, for example, it was page 13. So what I would do is go to the death date, and I'd look at page 13. Oops, not there. So I jumped to page 13 on the next day's edition, and it might have been there, it might not, or the next day after that. And I generally do that for up to a week, maybe 2 weeks. And many times when I did a search with the surname, I couldn't find the obituary. By browsing and jumping to the same page in the following issues for different dates, I was able to find it. So incorporate that into your techniques. The second one is, just because it is written in the newspaper does not mean it is true. We talked about that a little bit earlier when we said it was a clipping is a clue, not a fact. But again, it's an interpretation by someone who wrote the article of what has happened. So it doesn't necessarily mean it is true. For your genealogy research, where you're trying to home in on person's birth, marriage, and death dates, you're trying to discover who their brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles were, how they fit into the family tree. Just because it's written in the newspaper does not mean it is true. It's just another piece of evidence to help you get to an accurate family tree. A third thing that I'd like to take into consideration when you are really getting into newspaper research, especially if you just started, is join a group. There is a Facebook group called Genealogy and Newspapers. There's a Google Plus community called Genealogy and Newspapers. The Facebook group has almost 5,000 members at this date in January of 2015, when this webinar is initially recorded. Google Plus community has almost 1,000. So there's lots of people out there like you who have all different kinds of experiences, and many folks are very helpful in helping you determine where to look, how to look, etc. So take advantage of that. Join a group. What does the letter K have for us today? Well, keep track of your online searches so you can try them again in the future. Databases do add new papers all the time, and they also add more dates for existing papers. So you're going to want to keep track of your online searches, because I'll tell you that those searches you're going to want to do again, maybe a month later, maybe a year later, maybe a few years later. Keep track of them, keep a log, and that will pay off for you, I guarantee you. Keep an open mind. There are lots of different sections of the newspaper. Many folks home in with basic search, surnames, looking for an obituary, and that's great. But there is tons of stuff in every section of the newspaper. Advertisement, classified ads, women's page, vital statistics, legal section, sports. I found interesting articles in every section of the newspaper. So keep an open mind. Make sure you look at every section. Land applications, land sales, and real estate transactions. That's another example of stuff that's in a newspaper. I found real estate transactions to be rather interesting, because oftentimes in older newspapers, say in the 1800s, I would find a widow's name, didn't know she was a widow, who transferred some real estate from herself to someone else through a sale or whatever. And what did I draw from that? What kind of conclusion could I draw from that? Well, I didn't know she was a widow, but it may indicate that she had taken the deed because her husband had died. Most of the deeds in the old days were in the husband's name. Shouldn't necessarily be that way, but that's the way it was. So you can draw some conclusions, at least some clues from these types of articles. Legal notices is another great resource for information. You can find out about divorces, bankruptcies, sales of a business, transfer of ownership, all kinds of interesting stuff in the legal notices. Don't disregard those. We talked about libraries and offline searching. I repeat it again. Libraries are a place you must include in your research, because most of the old newspapers are there. There's a lot online, but there's a lot that are on microfilm or still on original newsprint. What about the letter M? Well, let's take a look at that. In the vitals or vital statistics area of the newspaper, you see obituaries, birth announcements, marriage information, divorces, etc. One thing that is often in many of these is a list of people where a marriage license has been issued. Please let me state this very clearly. A marriage license does not provide evidence of a marriage. You can get a marriage license, but you may not get married. Maybe someone dies before the wedding. Maybe they get cold feet. Maybe the wedding never happens in that area. Maybe they elope and get married 4 states over. But a marriage license does not provide evidence of a marriage. So take that into consideration when analyzing that particular information. One of the most important things that I need to let you know about during this webinar is that you need to learn how to misspell words, because the OCR process, because of the quality of the original copy, the scanning process, and the OCR software and their limitations, do not always provide in the index the exact spelling that the original author and typesetter of the newspaper intended. So the name Smith, S-M-I-T-H, may not end up in the index as S-M-T-H. It could end up being S-M-T-B or S-M-T-H or exclamation point T-H. You don't know what it's going to come out like. Remember in the letter E we talked about exchanging letters, B and H, C and E, for example. Misspell on purpose in your search criteria, and I will guarantee you will find more results and more articles about your ancestors. Please do this. It's not like elementary school where you're going to get a poor grade if you spell something wrong. This is not school. How about the letter N? Well, names of women up until pretty much the mid to late 20th century generally were not in newspapers. Maybe in an obituary, but usually they were referred to by their husband's name, obviously if they were married. So Mary Jones would not necessarily be in the newspaper as Mary Jones. She might be in there as Mrs. William Jones, the name of her husband. So you need to take that into consideration when trying to find articles about married women in a newspaper. In obituaries, you oftentimes see the term native of. For example, John Doe died peacefully in his sleep on October 20th, 1895. He was a native of Denver, Colorado. Well, native of does not mean they were born there. Maybe John Doe lived in Denver his whole life, but maybe he was born in Salem, Oregon. The obituary may not necessarily tell you that, and you should not assume that native of means that they were born there. Let's talk about obituaries and occupations, the letter O. Again, I mentioned this a little earlier, obituaries are only as good as a person who provided the information. And again, they may be a grieving relative, and so they may not remember things as clearly as they might normally if they were not in that state of emotion. Obituaries change from their initial publication. Check for a few days after. I have a specific case of this with one of my cousins, where she was a step child of someone who passed away, and the person who put the obituary information together for the newspaper did not include her in the initial publication on the first day that it was published. Say, I think it was a day after the person had died. 2 days later, the obituary was corrected. So, don't assume that the initial obituary is the only one out there. There may be subsequent ones that have different information in them. Please remember this. Obituaries are oftentimes published in different locations from where the person died. You may have seen an obituary where it says, Baltimore papers, please copy, or Brooklyn papers, please copy. So if a person lived in Baltimore but died in Minnesota, the Minnesota paper might have the obituary, but someone from the family may have also put an obituary in the other location. So you need to take that into consideration. Occupations are also something that you should consider putting in your search criteria, along with names, or even especially with names, because there are, especially for common names, lots of different occupations, and it will help you fine-tune the results and hopefully find the specific person that you are looking for. You need to always try to narrow the number of results so that you're homing in on the specific person. You want to have lots of results, obviously, because you want to have lots of articles, but lots of articles about the wrong person doesn't do you much good. So use occupations to help you there. If you've seen classified ads, and it's still the same today, after the invention of the telephone, when they became more numerous and popular, people put their phone number in the newspaper. So try searching for a phone number. You might be surprised. You might find an article or an ad about your ancestor that you wouldn't normally find, because maybe only their first name was in there. Call Jim at Lockhaven 72342, something like that. Do a search for Lockhaven 72342. You might find an ad about your ancestor Jim. There's information in the paper in all kinds of different sections and all kinds of different forms. I've had a lot of folks in my family tree who served in helping elections, either be as poll workers or precinct captains, and they're often listed in old newspapers around election time. Just another little piece of information to fill out the story of the life of your ancestors. This last one is very important, and that is plan your newspaper research. Don't just go in and throw names at a search box and click away. You need to plan it out, and you need to be disciplined. So plan your research, keep track of what happens, because later on you're going to possibly, especially for online searching, you're going to want to try those again as the databases and the collections become more numerous. Make sure and plan. Q, not a lot of clues for Q, but quit thinking that all old newspapers are online. They aren't, and likely never will be. We talked about that a couple of times earlier. So get that out of your thinking and try doing some offline searching. R is for research. We talked about plan your research. Well, research your plan. Don't get willy-nilly and try all kinds of different things without a plan. If you don't have a plan and you don't research the plan, you will miss results. I will guarantee you that. And if you ignore your plan, the same thing will happen over and over and over again. Plan your research, research your plan. A service that is available that is very helpful, it's called Redex. And it's for free American collections, and they're only available at libraries. So check out your local library or local archive, or maybe university somewhere within driving distance. See what they've got. They might have access to newspapers that you wouldn't find on a lot of the free sites that you can search for from your home. So check out those libraries and what they have, because I will tell you that a lot of libraries use the Redex service, and it will provide you more collections that you can search for online. You'll have to go to the library to do it, but it is certainly something that you can take advantage of. If you have a library card, they may provide remote access for you from your home, but that depends on the library, so check it out. Subscribe to some of the paid sites. Now, you know But there are a lot of free sites out there. You also know that there's Genealogy Bank, newspapers.com, British Newspaper Archive, newspaperarchives.com, etc. And there are many more. You don't want to pay for it. You're only going to get access to what's free. But many of these sites offer short-term or trial memberships, some for a 7-day trial period, some a small amount of money for 3 days, or for a month that is not necessarily recurring. Subscribe, try it out. If you plan your research, you can get a lot done in 7 days. Let me tell you, you certainly can. So consider subscribing to some of these paid sites, even for just a short time. School graduation lists are always part of newspapers when kids graduate from school. The interesting part about them, in my view, is oftentimes their full name is there, including their middle name. And then middle names are sometimes hard to find. I found a lot of middle names in World War I, World War II draft records, for example, draft card records. But there's a lot of places that do not put in the middle name. And sometimes it is very, very important, especially when you've got a common surname. So check out those school graduations lists. You might find the middle name of one of your ancestors, and that will be useful for you to research later for other types of information. Search the whole country. A lot of interesting articles were not necessarily just published in the local paper. If they were interesting to other folks in other areas, they might be published in other states or other provinces, other counties, etc. So if you feel like this type of article might be fitting to that kind of situation, search the whole country. I've got an example. One of my great-great-great-uncles somehow took possession of Geronimo's knife in the late 1800s. That article was not in the local papers in Southern California, where he lived at the time. But it was in a lot of different newspapers in Pennsylvania, in South Dakota, in Iowa, in Georgia. It was all over the place. So search other places as well. Searching for newspapers can certainly be tedious. Don't do it when you're tired, because you're going to miss proper search criteria. You're not going to be very creative. You might get sloppy, and it does take time, and it does take a plan, and it does take some discipline. So don't do it when you're tired or not well fed. The next T is Trove, Trove. Trove is the site for Australian newspapers. It is a free site. It's got millions of articles in it. If you have ancestors and or relatives or are interested in searching newspapers from Australia, use Trove. I would highly recommend it. U is for universities. Universities have a lot of collections of original newspapers as well as microfilm. But what they also do, the university libraries, is they create library guides. And in many of these universities, it will tell you how you can get access to newspapers from that area or that state, either via online searching or via microfilm, etc. It tells you what they have stored at their particular site for you to search. And there are a few universities that have created library guides for a lot of different newspapers in all kinds of different areas. University of Pennsylvania and Bowling Green State University are great examples. I would check out their websites and their library guides, because they have links to thousands of newspapers that are online across the United States, Canada, and other parts of the world, including Europe. So I would definitely take a look at UPenn and Bowling Green as great examples of library guides that will help you. V is for verify. Remember we talked about native of? It does not necessarily mean that person was born there. So you need to verify the birth location. It's not necessarily where the obituary stated where the person was a native of. So you need to always verify the birth location. Vacationers, people did take a vacation even in the older days. They were often listed in articles about resorts that they visited. I found tons of my ancestors who visited Soda Springs Resort or this hot spring or that hot spring or whatever. And it's just interesting information. It just helps fill out their life story. So take a look at those articles about resorts and who visited them. Lastly, vary your search criteria and combine names with addresses or other meaningful words. Be creative. Remember we talked about for obituaries using the term beloved or loving or dear. We search for phone numbers, search for addresses, search for occupations in conjunction with surnames and full names. You will get more results. Be creative. Think outside the box and you will find much more that will help you. Wikipedia has a list of online newspaper archives, and it's an excellent resource for finding online papers from all over the world, not just America or Canada or Europe, all over the world. And it tells you which of the sites are paid, in other words, you have to pay for, and which are free. A lot of sites, for example, a lot of current newspapers have the ability to search their archives, but you have to pay for it. You have to have a subscription. So Wikipedia will tell you that. It has the word pay or free next to each of the links. And there's lots of links in Wikipedia, so take a look at that. And that's actively updated, by the way. There's lots of people, as you know, with Wikipedia. It's a volunteer situation where people actually update things. And I have found it to be fairly accurate and reasonably up to date. You'll get a dead link from time to time, but not very often. So check out Wikipedia. There's actually 2 entries for the letter X. The first is very hard to pronounce, and I'm not sure how to pronounce it, so I'll call it Zuko. It's called Zuko Answers. It has a list of links from its free newspaper archives. That is another good resource for online newspaper sites, like Wikipedia, like Icon, like Heaton's list for British and Irish newspapers, and others that I have mentioned. It is a good resource that has a list of links to online newspaper sites. Extra thought is not only helpful, but it's pretty mandatory. Before you download an online newspaper image, think ahead about what you will be using it for. Don't make the clipping so small that you can't zoom it later and read it. Okay? Make sure you name the file of the clipping appropriate so you know where it came from. Make sure you save a PDF as well as the clipping, the JPEG of the article. So you need to think about this stuff before you just start firing away, searching and saving. So take that into consideration. For the letter Y, YouTube has many short training videos on newspaper research for genealogy. I myself have created about 50 of them. For basically, there's training on how to use a lot of the different state sites and some international sites as well, and how you navigate through their online newspaper collections. But there's many more besides myself who have also provided training videos. So do a search for newspaper research for genealogy or some words like that on YouTube, and you may find some training that will be helpful to you. And lastly, for the letter Y, you can be successful at this. You will be able to find ancestor articles. You will be able to find more ancestor articles, and you will be able to find pertinent ancestor articles. Train yourself, apply what you learn, be persistent, be smart about your searching and browsing, plan your research and research your plan, be creative. All of the things, if you apply all of those, you will be successful, I guarantee you. And lastly, there's not much for the letter Z. Zebras, that's the letter Z. Just like newspapers, they're black and white. And Z end is just kind of a fun little way to end it for the letter Z. And that's number 75 in our list of techniques. I will leave you with our summary that, again, as I mentioned, try these techniques and tips and you will be a much more successful newspaper researcher. I guarantee you that if you incorporate these into your searching, whether it be online or offline, you will find more articles and you will be much happier about finding articles about your ancestors. As I said, I do have a website, www.theancestorhunt.com. There is a specific page called Newspapers, NEWSPAPERS, exclamation point, on the tab of all of the pages. If you click on it, you're going to find a lot of newspaper related links. There are about 12,000 all told, and there are about 50 articles also about searching and researching newspapers. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time. It's been a fun webinar to do. It was a fun one to put together, and I hope these help you out. Happy hunting, good luck, and go for it. You will find articles about your ancestors and some really interesting stuff, I guarantee you. Thanks.